Hi, I'm Ted Lohman, and we're off the record. Along with me, as always, Peggy Kane. Before we get started, this should be a very interesting show. Peggy and I have had a chance to interview a number of people throughout the world having to do with the military and their aspects and the way they think of what is going on in the UFO community. We'll be talking with Clifford Stone, Colonel Corso, and a number of different people throughout the show. But before we get into that, let's discuss a little bit about who these people are and why we are presenting them this evening.
Yeah, Ted, we had the real privilege to interview both Colonel Corso, who's a retired colonel, and Clifford Stone, well, I guess about a year ago. And they kind of come from two different places. Colonel Corso has written a book called The Day After Roswell. He was part of the Foreign Technology Department in the 1960s, and he was also, I believe, on the Security Council of President Eisenhower's administration.
Right.
He came out with a book. The gentleman is now 82 years old, and he came out with this book called The Day After Roswell. He talks at length about having seen firsthand an alien body, as well as his background, what happened with the artifacts from the Roswell crash, and why he believes the government isn't coming or didn't come out with the information right away. And primarily he felt that they wanted to get a beat on who we were being visited by and what the agenda was of the aliens before they went public with the information.
For so many years, a lot of the people, the skeptics, I'd say, how come the military isn't coming out with these retired people? Well, we know Robert O'Dean, Bob Dean, a good friend of ours, Wendell Stevens, a number of other people throughout the world, not only here in the U.S., that have the military background and had the need to know. They are now coming out and have been coming out. Clifford Stone, for instance, that you'll see in the beginning of this show, was in the intelligence department, and for years he had the inside scoop of what was going on with inside, not only in the military, but what was going outside in the civilian sectors. He'll talk about Project Blue Book and what Project Blue Book was for the public and what Project Blue Book was for the insiders, if you will. There was many times there was crews or groups of individuals, mainly 3 people at a time, that were set up to go out and actually participate in the recovery of certain crafts. And then Colonel Corso, of course, coming out, is another person that is very involved and has the credentials of being able to tell his story to the public finally.
Well, I asked Colonel Corso if he had had any kind of harassment or problems coming forth with this information because of his security oaths. He claimed that he was coming forward now because of his family, particularly his grandkids, had been asking him, well, what was the truth about what is going on with the UFOs, or what was going on with the UFOs? And he felt that he had a responsibility to come forward with it. He said he had not had any problems coming forth with the information. No one had threatened him or threatened to take away his retirement or any of that. And then when we had an opportunity to talk to Clifford, it wasn't exactly the same way for Clifford.
No.
He apparently, I think the difference, according to Clifford, was that he was coming forth with hard evidence, documentation, whereas Colonel Corso was basically telling his experiences without presenting hard evidence.
Well, not only that, but Colonel Corso is no longer in the service. He's retired. While Clifford Stone was doing this investigative work, he was still in the service, which, on one hand, the service people, that's why he was essentially employed in the service to do this research, but the Army wouldn't acknowledge it. So he was kind of in a catch-22, yet he was inside knowing what he was supposed to do and how to react on these alleged down craft or alien bodies, but on the other hand, he wasn't supposed to know. And I think a lot of that is going on. We know the stealth bomber that was built 20 years before its time, and a lot of secrets. The government can hold secrets.
Yes, they certainly can. I think at this point now we're going to start with showing some of the excerpts from our interviews with, I believe we're going to start out with Colonel Corso.
Clifford Stone.
Clifford Stone, and a kind of a dialogue between the two, showing some of their different experiences.
Let me say before we get to that, the interview that we had with Colonel Corso was 12 o'clock at night in Roswell in a suite. We just grabbed a camera, so turn up your volume a little bit and listen to what this gentleman has to say.
The most pressing issue within the UFO phenomenon is try to get it out to where the public understands that the United States government has been investigating UFOs prior to June 24th, 1947. It started during the Second World War, and it leads on up to today. Now, people believe that with the Blue Book situation, where it was signed, then Grudge, then Blue Book, they were forced to go ahead and start a program because on June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw something, and it was picked up by the media, and other people started to report things. So the government, the Air Force, in this instance, was pressured to go ahead and start a publicly known, although classified, program to do the investigations. They tried to disengage that once in 49 by saying it was all just hallucinations. And they said, well, that won't work, so then they started Grudge. Grudge speaks for itself because no one would be involved in it because they could not conclude what they had already concluded, that UFOs were interplanetary. So they said, okay, fine, we'll go ahead with this. And in 1952, they changed the name to Blue Book. It would remain Blue Book all the way through until 1969 when they terminate. Now, what happens in 1969? Here we have, in 1966, a university that is starting an investigation in UFOs. We in the intelligence community already know they cannot possibly come to any firm conclusions. We in the intelligence community already know what conclusions they're going to come to. And why is that? Because science has to be 100% sure in their facts. In order to be 100% sure in your facts, you have to have a viable means to study the phenomena you are investigating. This is not the case with UFOs.
There was reports that said that UFOs had crashed in different parts of the world, and they were buzzing our planes and so forth. I know about it then, but I didn't know about the Roswell crash then. I learned about the Roswell crash when I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was the duty officer that night. That meant I was in charge of the security of the whole area, including the inspection of the guards, every place where they were. So I went around about 2 or 3 in the morning to the veterinarian area, because we had horses at Fort Riley. And one of the sergeants that I knew was a sergeant of the guard. I used to bowl with him. And I told him, Sergeant, how's everything going? They told me at headquarters that this area was very secure. He said, yes, come on, Colonel. He said, I want to show you something. So he took me back in the back room, and there was 5 crates. They looked like crates there. Lifted up a tarpaulin on one, I did, and here's this body there. At first I thought it was maybe a child, because it was only about 5 feet, shorter than 5 feet. It looked to me. And it was floating in fluid. And then I took a good look at it, and this lasted about 10 or 15 seconds only. And I figured, what is that? And the stomach sort of turned. But that was usual, because in combat, when you see people killed, your stomach sort of turned. But you have to recover fast, especially if you're an officer in command. You have to keep going. I did the same thing that night at Fort Riley. And I covered it up, and I told him, Sergeant, be careful. This is very careful. I don't want you to get in trouble. Get out of here.
Now, here it is. This all is supposed to be in the Blue Book files. Enter the Bolinar Memo, October 1969. It stipulates in there that those cases which could have any bearing on national security are not, and were never meant to be, part of the Project Blue Book system. In short, one can interpret that reasonably so, without much stretch of the imagination, that it was trying to make clear Project Blue Book was to appease the public while there was another, much more highly classified program doing the scrutiny on the UFO cases that did have a bearing on national security.
You know, one thing, Ted, that Colonel Corso seems to reiterate in his book, this, by the way, is the book, I don't know if I'm supposed to hold it up here, The Day After Roswell. It was very controversial, and apparently Strom Thurmond had written a foreword in this book, which he later was very reluctant about admitting to because he didn't realize that this was going to be a book about aliens. But enough said, it was already in there. But, you know, Colonel Corso really seems to sort of try to explain, in his opinion, that the military was not so much trying to be secretive about this, in that they wanted to find out what the aliens wanted from us, where they stood technology-wise, whether they were coming to take over the planet, before they let people know what was going on. So he likes to paint it as that they really wanted to understand if there was a threat here to national security before they went public. Of course, they're still, you know, playing the same game. So I don't know, it seems it's getting to be a kind of a stale argument at this point.
Well, at the beginning of that interview, he talked about having reports of flying saucers early on, but he said, I didn't know about Roswell until later. He also goes on in the interview talking about while he was at White Sands, in charge of the missile range, that there were a number of times that they had the technology in radar lock, and that they would lock on to these UFOs that were going at incredible speeds, and they would actually break the lock. And when he called to headquarters in the Pentagon and the White House, they said, oh, don't worry about that, let that go. I want to jump to a little bit of Clifford, in Clifford's book here, and the reason why Clifford, I feel, is so important. There's so many individuals out there that are talking and saying there's no evidence of UFOs in the government. Well, Clifford has spent years and years and years, and the name of, what is the name of the book? I can't
UFOs are
read.
real.
UFOs are real. This is his second book, and this is just full of documentation from the United States government that has been reclassified so that it can be taken out of top secret. And Clifford has spent literally tens of years, maybe 20 years, investigating this, pulling out the documents to prove to those that want to know, that those that are saying that this doesn't happen, that the UFO has been studying, I mean, the government has been studying the UFO phenomena for more than just 1947, all the way up until 1942. And if Corso was right, and Blue Book was shut down in 1969, and if allegedly there was a crash at Roswell, and Corso saw alien bodies, like he just stated, what took him from 47 to 69 to end Blue Book and to say that we have found everything that we need to find, and we find that the UFO phenomena really presents no national security threat? I think that's kind of the dog, or the tail wagging the dog.
Well, you know, we get back to, and we've brought this up a number of times on the show, the Brookings Institute report that came out in the early 60s that said that basically, you know, it would change society as we know it if we were being visited by an extraterrestrial race. That was obviously, if they got here, they're more advanced than we are, and that any culture that's affected by a more advanced race usually loses their own civilization or culture, and they felt that the people just weren't ready, according to this Brookings Institute's findings. So whether that had an impact on keeping this whole thing secret. But you know, one thing that people have asked me over and over again is, how can the government keep such a big secret? I mean, this is a huge thing.
They can't. They can't keep it a secret. The thing that is stopping it from getting out to mainstream is mainstream media. It's been hyped for years that people that are involved in this are psychotic or schizophrenic or in a number of hallucinations.
Right.
In a number, they don't. They meaning the media or the scientists or the individuals, the government, they don't look into the facts, and if they do, they're not presented to us. They ridicule the messenger. They try to attack the messenger instead of the message. And so more and more people that are actually, that have seen something that they can't understand, they have nowhere to go. So they've just shut up about it. But over the recent years, with individual people going out with camcorders and television, now there are more televisions in all of the homes and VCRs, which we didn't have in the 50s.
It's true.
And this is around the world. More and more people are getting the information that they couldn't get before, and there have been Roper polls and other polls taken that 67% of the population do believe that there's something flying in the skies that wasn't built on this planet.
Basically, as far as other countries, all we ever hear about are the wars that are taking place in other countries. But we never hear about, well, we don't hear about the UFO events in this country, but there have been major UFO events in other countries, and they are not even mentioned. Like, for instance, the Mexico City event that happened in New Year's Day, I think it was 1991, where the Mexico City was virtually shut down. The largest city in the world was virtually shut down because there was a flap of UFOs, and it made the top news lines of every major paper in Mexico City, but we never got one word of it here in this country. And if that's not a news blackout, then I don't know what else you could call that.
Well, we also had the Phoenix Lights, which has been muddied up a little bit, but something did happen. It wasn't just flares. There was a number of different incidents that happened over a period of 3 hours in Phoenix, Arizona. Some say 7 events, some say 3 different events. There's still investigations going on. And I think we're at fault a little bit here in the UFO community. We have a rush to judgment. We want everything that we can't tag or see a writing on saying that they are UFOs without further investigation, because I bet 80% of the stuff that seems to be strange in the sky to us can be identified.
Yeah. I think at this point now we're going to get on to the second segment of the conversation with Clifford Stone and Colonel Corso. So whenever you're ready, you can roll that tape, please.
Yes, I'll describe it. It looked like it had spindly, legs were not big legs, they were sort of spindly. The arms were sort of, I saw 4 fingers, I saw no thumb. And the chest was small, sort of, and the skin looked sort of grayish color. And then the head was large for the proportion of the body. Not real big now, but large. And the eyes were both slanted, sort of. And they had about a half a filament on them, and no nose, no ears, no mouth, just slits. So I covered it up, and I figured to myself when I was walking away and outside, I better not say anything about this. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. So I figured operate in the intelligence manner. Hold this in reserve, put it up here someplace or back here. Maybe in the future I'll get some cooperation and be able to evaluate this, but not at the moment. I don't know what it is.
But behind the scenes, you had another program that very meticulously, very carefully analyzed the situation. The scientific community on the outside, the Common Committee, would not have the technical data that this other group would have. So what we have right now is prior to Blue Book, prior to sign, an official investigation, highly classified. We have more answers, but not a whole lot more, today than what we had in 1943 when I believe all this started. But we're still looking.
So he called me in one day. He said, I'm going to make you chief of Point Mounts Division, and you're going to inherit a 3-drawer file. I want you to go through that file and look what's there, and you give me a program and tell me what you think they are. So I take this file in my office, downstairs from his office, on the second floor in the Pentagon, and I open it up and I start finding this material, which he called later, of course, it was junk file. And it was a bunch of wires, which I didn't even know what they were, which were emitting colors. I didn't even know if they were wires. I had this chip, this integrated circuit, a laser instrument that could do like some of the fine cuttings that they said in animal mutilations. And I had also fiber optics, something I had those. And we called them, we started that because one of my, and I had the reports on autopsy that's performed at Walter Reed on our lab, which we financed at Walter Reed. And when I read that, it matched with what I saw at Fort Riley 14 years before. The whole autopsy was similar to what I'd seen. So then I started putting 2 and 2 together. And gradually these items I started putting, then the general called me in and said, work out a program. Find scientists and engineers that are working on these things and shove them in there. I told him, but General, I have to study these things a little bit because really, I told him, I'm not that bright. I don't know what a lot of these things are, but they're important. He said, well, Phil, they are important. Give me a program with that, getting back to the body. So when I read the autopsy, I went to the general. I told him, General, I've seen one of these. And I started describing it to him. He said, put it all on paper, Phil, and give it to me. So we put it down. I put it on paper. And he said, I got Phil. He said, what do we got? What are we up against here? I told him, I don't know. He was a very religious guy. He used to go to retreats at Loyola. And also, he was the kind of man that took his helmet off and got a sergeant's helmet at Fort Charles Hill and I followed his men. So when I started putting all this on the extraterrestrial together, we finally gave it a name. I told him, it looks like, these are clones. And so the name came out, extraterrestrial biological entity. That's what we figured they were. We better describe it. We never used the letters ET. There was no such thing. They were clones. Not look like clones. They were clones. We figured that they were created by some other intellect. And we also came to the decision that they were made specifically to travel in space. Because we knew even in those days that man could not travel in space. His bones are affected, his muscles are affected, his brain is affected. Man cannot travel in space. So we came to the conclusion these creatures, whatever they are made to travel in space. And then gradually through what the work we did, we found out that this integrated with the flying saucer, and really, because most of the failures in making flying saucers were the guidance system. That this creature was also the guidance system, was part of the engine of the flying saucer. And gradually I got into the lymphatic system, the lungs, and that thing on the movie, people asked me, I told there was some truth to that, because they pulled out an eyelid, and no one knew about that eyelid. That eyelid was a light gatherer, so they could see in the dark. They had a...
Hello, I'm Brenda Williams, and with me is Nick Wyatt, here with the news. Nick, we have a release from Peter Gersten, who's head of the Cause Foundation, and I'm going to read this. It's released March 24th out of Phoenix, Arizona, and it's Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, which is Cause. And it's a nonprofit Arizona activist organization dedicated to ending all secrecy surrounding this planet's contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. They'll file the first of 3 important Freedom of Information Act lawsuits in Phoenix U.S. District Court Wednesday, March 25th. Just to give you some Background: in 1981, Cause filed suit against both the National Security Agency, NSA, and the Central Intelligence Agency for UFO-related documents. In 1982, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the Cause appeal, thereby allowing the U.S. District Court's decision to stand in the NSA lawsuit. The District Court had found that the NSA was justified in withholding 135 UFO documents, stating that the NSA's continued need for secrecy far outweighed the public's right to know. Cause is once again back in court and now asking a federal judge to help in its search for the truth. This time, Cause is going after the Department of Army for the documents confirming certain observations made by former Army Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, as described in his book, Day After Roswell. According to Corso, who is now retired, a well-respected and decorated military officer, he personally observed in 1947 what appeared to him to be non-human corpses which he believes were recovered from the crash of an extraterrestrial vehicle. He further states in his book and confirms in subsequent interviews that years later he came into possession of the autopsy reports of these bodies. Corso states that the reports refer to the bodies as extraterrestrial biological entities. The Army has stated that it has no records confirming Corso's statements or acknowledging the existence of the studies or autopsy reports. Cause hopes that by seeking a judicial solution in an open and adversarial proceeding, the truth will eventually surface. The federal court complaint and the prior request can be found at the Cause website, which is located at http://www.cause.org. And as we get further developments, we'll relay those onto you.
What do you think, Brenda? Do you think he's going to be successful? I know Peter's a very well-versed attorney dealing with filing lawsuits and all that. What do you think? Do you think he's going to be successful? Do you think the government's going to sort of shuttle him around? And
well, I think that if anybody can do it, Peter's the guy that could do it. He's very detailed and will go after the truth and get information where someone else might give up and not be as persistent. So I think that if anybody can do it, Peter would be the guy that would be able to do this.
Well, let's hope he's successful, because we need something to sort of crack things wide open. I think if he's successful at getting the documents, I think that'll start snowballing and lead to the release of other documents that could really open things up.
Well, it's just going to be very interesting to see what comes about this court case and what the Army's going to come back with. So it'll be interesting, and we'll, as I said, get back with you on follow-up information as we know it. Also, do you have something?
Well, I've got a couple of quick announcements here. I'll get them in before our time is up. Olivia Charisha is doing a Flower of Life workshop, which is the Drumville-based material. It's going to be here in Tucson starting April 17th. Her number is 520-881-3820. That's 881-3820. For those of you who are not familiar with the Flower of Life workshops, Peggy and I took one a few years ago. They're very informative, enlightening. She's going to be discussing and sharing and teaching people how to activate their own Merkaba, which is basically our own inner flying saucer, so to speak. The ability to move through time and space with the Merkaba of light. We'll learn about sacred geometry, the relationship of extraterrestrials to our spiritual growth, and the transformational period coming up. So this is going to be on the April 17th, and it might be worthwhile checking out. The other thing is coming up right away, which is this weekend actually, coming up Sunday on March 29th from 6 p.m. till 11 p.m. It's called UFO Hidden Agendas. We're going to have Colin Andrews, who's considered the world's foremost crop circle expert, Peter Davenport, who's the director of the National UFO Reporting Center, Travis Walton, an abductee and the person that the movie Fire in the Sky was based upon, and his experience being abducted, and Jim Delatoso, who's a well-known UFO authority on Phoenix Lights and others aspects. He's got a company up in Phoenix that analyzes film and photographic evidence of UFO activity. If you need to find out more about it, you can call area code 602-706-1871. And it's going to be this Sunday, though. So for those of you who are watching this live, it's up in Phoenix, and from 6 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock, and be very worthwhile checking out. That's it on the announcements. So as far as, one more thing, yes. Peggy and I went down and gave a nice little talk on UFOs and extraterrestrials to the kids down in Sassabee at the San Fernando School. And we presented the whole approach. We showed a bunch of different aliens, not too negative, just a lot of different strange types, talked about flying saucers, and we tried to present it in a very positive, uplifting, exciting way. And I don't have, unfortunately, the drawing with me, but one of the kids gave us, just before we left, a really cute drawing, and it had two aliens, one of them being beamed down from a flying saucer, and underneath it, it said, "We come in peace." And I thought that was very, Peggy and I both thought that was very enlightening as to where the children today see the extraterrestrials. They look at it as an exciting, informative, non-scary type of experience, and I think that since they are our future, this is where we're heading into as far as our understanding of the whole UFO phenomenon.
So, Nick, you think the children were very open to this?
Yeah, they were. They were
And
exciting.
what were the ages?
Oh, they went from probably preschool, 5, 6 years old, to about 12 years old.
Did they ask you questions?
They asked some very interesting questions. In fact, one of the little girls gave a classic abduction description.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That she had experienced?
That she had experienced.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was really neat. It was a fun little thing. Then after that, we had a chance to talk to some retired folks from Green Valley who came down. They were a bit more closed, but anyway, it was a fun thing all the way around.
Yeah, I think there's just so much information out there that I think you'd have to be living in a cave not to hear of UFOs or something like that, either on the radio or TV nowadays.
Yeah, I think the kids are really connected with all the new TV shows and extraterrestrials and stuff that are coming out. They're open. They're definitely open. So it's a fun thing to see.
But I think that's about it for us tonight.
Yes, the next segment though is going to be about with Jim a segment on Jim Marrs. He's the author of Alien Agenda. In May, he will be doing a workshop on remote viewing here in Tucson. So stay tuned. But this next segment, I think you'll find very interesting. So if we could roll with that, that'll be great.
Along with UFOs and various other things, one of the topics that's been downplayed and dismissed for so long is psychic ability, and I'll have to admit I fell into that too. I didn't pay much attention to that. I figured that was, newspaper horoscopes and the psychic hotline. But in 1992, I stumbled across the military intelligence officers that had been trained and were using a technique they called remote viewing. And this was in the United States Army, and these were like captains and majors, and these were very credible people. And as I studied it, I found out that the United States government had been working with this since the early 70s, and that in the mid-70s they had formed this psychic spy unit, and that this had gone through 4 administrations to the tune of some $30 million. So that told me that somebody thought they were getting some good out of it. So I began to pay closer attention. And basically, remote viewing is the ability to perceive persons, places, or things at distances by means other than the normal 5 senses. The bottom line is it's what we used to call clairvoyance. And it's actually amazing because I'm here to tell you it works. I interviewed the people that did it. I interviewed people that were on the oversight committees. I interviewed the scientists that developed it out at Stanford Research Institute in California. And I've done it myself. It works. It's my opinion that remote viewing is still being used today within the government. They've buried it away very deeply because I think the problem here is, as in most spheres, they simply don't want the general mass public to really know what's going on. And this is a tool to penetrate what's really happening. And that's the final point I'd like to make about remote viewing, and this is the thing that led me to writing my book, Alien Agenda, was that, and this is another thing that they've tried to downplay and act like is not going on, but it's absolutely amazing. Every single military-trained remote viewer, every one, has had direct knowledge of the unidentified flying objects. And they know they're real, they know they're here, they know they're visiting this planet, and they know that they come from off-planet.
Well, I don't know whether that's good or bad, whether they're coming from off-planet. I have my own theories that some of them might be here and have been here all the time, and possibly we're just learning more and more about the physics and different dimensions, and we're finding out that we really don't know what we think we do know. This is Alien Agenda, Jim Marrs. It's an incredible book. The gentleman was a newspaper reporter for many, many, many years. He's also the individual that wrote Crossfire, the one that Oliver Stone used to do the movie about the Kennedy assassination. He personally has been involved, which I haven't, been involved in remote viewing, which to a lot of people might seem strange, but if you were to go and ask the Native Americans about remote viewing, they probably would tell you that their shaman does it through vision quests or through their ability to look into the smoke or whatever they do to be able to tell the tales. And Peggy, but you're more knowledgeable about this. You've taken classes.
Yeah, I studied remote viewing. I took a 5-day class and then another 4-day intensive, and it's a fascinating study. It's a lot of work. I mean, it is a lot of work because the protocols are very demanding, very defined. It's usually an hour, at least an hour and a half of intense concentration to do this. And but the results can be very startling. You can also be dead wrong. I mean, it is not an exact science by any stretch, but I appreciate it because it gives you get the feedback right away, since you have no idea what the target is, and you're only given a series of numbers to identify whatever the target is. Anything, could be any person, place, thing, or event. Then when you get to find out how you did, you know right away. There's nothing like talking about. It's not so much. You can have a verifiable target and know how you've done, so you get a chance to practice your skills, and it definitely is a skill.
Isn't the key to it having a group of individuals coming up and trying to have the same target and then try to take all of the information and put it together, and what dovetails or overlaps can almost generally be set in stone a lot of times?
Just about. When you have people who are really good at this and have a track record, you will. I think within the military they would use a number of remote viewers, as you said, then corroborate the information so that they could get. If everybody's getting the same things, then they could be pretty confident that this was correct material. So they wouldn't just depend upon one remote viewer.
Well, the military, it seems like anything that comes to the public has to go through the military first. All of our inventions are usually through some kind of, our major inventions, I might say, through military R&D. Clifford Stone, not Clifford Stone, but Colonel Corso said a lot of the integrated circuits and stuff that we have now in our computers came from alien technology. Remote viewing was first brought to the forefront through studies through SRI, Stanford Research Institute, which was a brainchild of Ingle Swann and some of the other people that thought that they could get into it, kind of a psychic warfare, if you will. And when the government puts in millions and millions and millions of dollars doing this, it finally gets to the private sector. And anybody out there that is looking to try to do something like this, give us a call here. Peggy's trying to set something up. Call area code 520-323-2371, because Jim Marrs will be coming to town in May to do this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to go into a gentleman that just got out of the service, and it is kind of like remote viewing. It's Dan Sherman. And why don't you tell him a
Dan
little bit about it?
was a really interesting interview. He considered himself an intuitive communicator, and as you're going to hear on the video, he was genetically managed in the womb as a fetus in order to be able to communicate with aliens through computers, but not being wired. It was just that he would be using a computer to have this communication. So we're going to go on to that videotape right now. Okay.
My name is Dan Sherman, and I was an intuitive communicator for the National Security Agency. While stationed with the United States Air Force, I was a member of the United States Air Force. In 1992, I went to school for my regular job as an electronic intelligence specialist, and this was at the NSA complex in Fort Meade, Maryland, and I went to school at the FanX, which is a facility down the road, and I was called. The first day I got there, I was called by a captain, and this became my commander of the Gray Project, so to speak. I was called in, and he proceeded to tell me what I would be doing at night after my regular classes had ended, and the classes that I had originally gone there for. And these classes were going to be about 3 or 4 hours long at night, and then he proceeded to tell me exactly what my role in that would be. And this is where I was completely amazed and shocked, and I went through all kinds of emotions and everything. But he told me that in 1960, Project Preserve Destiny was initiated, and at the time, the government was in contact with an alien species based on their 1947 contact, which was interesting now, but at the time that didn't have any significance to me. I didn't know what 1947 was from anything else. But he said based on that, Project Preserve Destiny started in 1960, and this was the genetic testing phase. They started to abduct human women to genetically test them for compatibility with this particular procedure. And, excuse me, the compatibility phase ended in 1963, and then they started actually abducting to actually genetically manage or manipulate the fetuses that they were abducting. And my mother was abducted again in 1963, and this was after I was conceived. I was genetically managed in order to have this ability, to grow into this ability. And that was it. And he said, any questions? And of course, you know, my eyes are about as big as saucers, and I was actually expecting to be a practical joke. You know, somebody would jump out of the closet and say, ha, 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 you fell for that alien thing, didn't you? But nobody jumped out of the closet. So I went on to base number 1, PPD base number 1, Project Preserve Destiny base number 1. And that's where I had my first contact after I was there about a month and a half or 2 months before I had my first contact. And it just, out of the blue, I just started receiving the contact. And it was very surprising, of course. It took me by surprise because I really didn't know what to expect. Prior to this time, I didn't have any actual communication with an alien until that time. The school, I interfaced with a computer, and it was obviously a very exotic technology because I was interfacing with a computer without any feedback or any wires or anything like that fed to me. And I started to receive abduction data, which is what led me to seek my discharge, because I started to get very uncomfortable with the information that I was receiving. I started to receive things like, and of course they didn't come out and say, this is abduction data, but by the content of the communication, I could sense and tell that it was abduction data. Things like, and of course these are my translations of what they were telling me, but I was reporting categories like potentiality for recall and residual pain levels, and the latitude and longitude of, I assumed, the point where they abducted or whatever, but it was a location. It looked like a location, and times and things like that. And I got very uncomfortable with this data. And I guess if I was told by somebody, my grade commander or whatever, if I was told by him what you're receiving and why this is and the wherefores and whyfores and all that, then maybe I'd have felt more comfortable about it. But I wasn't told anything. I just received all this abduction data, what I perceived to be abduction data, and it just was very unsettling and disheartening. We talked, and of course there's a long story that is involved up to this point, but I actually got to the point where I could speak to them in a more of an informal way, and I got to ask a few questions that I was able to learn some things. Wasn't able to learn a lot, but one of the things that I was able to learn was their method of transport. They use time to transport themselves, so I would imagine they were from a large distance away. The time aspect of it is I asked them if they can go back or forward in time, and they said, no, we can't go back or forward, but we can go around time, which was very fascinating to me because I've always been fascinated by time, and that was an interesting aspect of one of the things that I learned from them. So I think there's another agenda, and it perhaps may be just the aliens, and they're not telling the government counterparts what that agenda is, the ultimate agenda, and they're just using them as pawns. We're using all of us as pawns. I don't know. Some information has come to light since I've been at the conference here that has really thrown things up in a hodgepodge of information. I'm still trying to sort it out, but I think there's a larger picture to this, and you get into, I'm sure everybody's heard of the world government. I can't remember what it's called. There's so many different names to them. And maybe this has something to do with their agenda. There's an overseers of the world, and they're in communication with aliens, and there's an ultimate purpose there. I don't know. I don't know the true purpose. There's so many different options that there could be. So.
My name is Edgar Fouché. I spent 20 years with the U.S. Air Force and another 8 years as an engineering program manager for defense contractors. I was on research and development and flight operational test and evaluation for the F-15, the F-16, the A-10, the B-1, and the F-117 when they were new. I was involved in automatic test equipment, crypto, electronic countermeasures, and aircraft development. I believe that all the major aircraft companies are involved in one way or another. Lockheed Skunk Works has always been the lead as far as advanced technology. But Los Alamos, Sandia, Lawrence Livermore also support this development. Ms. Boeing was involved in the TR-3A Manta, which is a bat-wing-shaped stealth vehicle that originally flew out of Groom. When I was doing interviews with defense contractors and SR-71 pilots and engineers that had worked like programs, I'd trace back the development of the magnetic field disruptor as far back as 1965 with General Dynamics Convair Division. At that time, the program had been 10 years old. They were reverse engineering technology that wasn't available at that time. The difference between normal evolution of science, where papers are written and pros and cons are debated on the theories, and then a practical experiment is developed, and once the experiment is proven, practical applications of this new technology is sought after usually a Department of Defense for weapons or aircraft. But in 1965, when my friend was working the magnetic field disruptor, they actually had information on what the craft would do, what it was made out of, and things like size, weight, density, but they had no papers written on it, no theories, and they were basically told, build one of these from the pieces, make it work, and explain it to us how it works. From the magnetic field disruptor, when it was tested finally in the mid-'80s at Papoose, they fired up the accelerator and it didn't do anything. And later, looking at the test data, they found out that 89% of the weight and mass was reduced in proximity to the accelerator. So when you reverse engineer a UFO and it only works 89% of what they think it's going to do, then the only thing you can do is hang a triangular-shaped body with advanced multimode rockets, one on each corner of the triangle, and fly the accelerator, which was developed from the crashed saucers, around. And you only have to propel 11% of the triangle because 89% of the mass and weight is reduced. The magnetic field disruptor, which is the core of the technology in the flying triangles, was developed from reverse engineering. There was no evolution of science that produced this technology. From the people I talked to, the technology was anywhere from 30 to 50 years ahead of anything possible to working with gravity. Even today, the papers written on controlling gravity in one aspect or another are controversial. So to have a vehicle that actually can affect gravity by warping it, this is not anti-gravity, but it essentially warps gravity around the accelerator. The technology was being worked on as far back as the mid-'50s that I've been able to trace. There was and still are no papers, scientific papers, written supporting the theories that allow this technology to work. The flying triangle, the prototype, was 200 feet across. It was first flown in 1989 or 1990. The operational version of the TR-3B flying triangle is 600 feet across. The fact that it's been spotted doing 40G turns, most people say, well, the pilots couldn't take 40G turns. 40 gravitational forces is enough to crush most people. However, if you compute 89% reduction of 40 Gs, you basically have 4.1 Gs that the pilots take because the mass and weight's reduced, and also the G forces. And a person can take 4 Gs comfortably. Can travel at Mach 9 plus. I don't have the latest specifications, but the prototype flew at Mach 9 vertically or horizontally. It could obtain suborbital altitudes. It is essentially a long loiter time surveillance and reconnaissance craft. The minimum crew of the TR-3B is 4. I don't know what the maximum capacity is. The flying wings were first flown in the U.S. in 1948, and they were essentially built by Northrop. There were circular wing aircraft, or saucers, being prototyped and tested by the Nazis in World War II. Some of their science and technology and scientists were brought over to the United States. For example, AVRO or Avro had a contract with the Department of Defense and built several prototypes of the flying saucer in Canada. They had told citizens for years that after the first Avro car did not meet specifications, the program was canceled. Recent Freedom of Information Act releases have showed that many versions of the Avro saucer were built and tested and flown out of Groom Lake in the 60s. The Department of Defense strives on secrecy. There's more money going into black technology than ever before. There's less world threats, so you would think that the defense budgets would be reduced, but in essence, we're spending more now on black programs than we ever have. The most fascinating top-secret facility that I know of is the Defense Advanced Research Center, which is called DARC, which is based at Papoose Lake, south of Groom Lake in Area 51. It's a facility that goes 10 stories underground and has a massive amount of floor space. The hangars for the TR-3B flying triangle and TR-3A flying batwing manta are housed and serviced because the depot is at Papoose. Essentially, the aircraft can be parked in hangars built in the sides of hills. The hangars have floors much like carrier decks to where the aircraft can be taken down many levels below to be serviced and maintained. That's where the logistics support is for these black aircraft. When I was assigned to Nellis Air Force Base in the late 70s, I worked electronic countermeasures. I was certified on certain crypto equipment. All cryptological equipment in the U.S. is controlled by the National Security Agency and a top secret queue and crypto access clearances. I was assigned to Groom Lake Air Base for 2 weeks temporary to repair some crypto equipment that was being maintained by a person that was permanently assigned there but had to go on emergency leave. One of the first things that I noticed that was unusual from my experiences was you have to wear these very myopic, they almost look like welder's glasses. They have thick polarized lenses. There's no peripheral vision. Anything beyond 30 feet is totally blurred. You have to wear these. Part of the briefing the security people give you is anytime you're outside a hangar, you have to wear those. If you're not permanently assigned there, you have to be escorted. And all escorts are armed escorts. So you always remember what causes you discomfort. A couple of friends of mine that flew the SR-71 and other prototype advanced vehicles at Groom all complained about having to wear the glasses. And it fascinates me that all these people that supposedly have worked at Groom Air Base have never mentioned these uncomfortable glasses you have to wear. Stealth and reconnaissance aircraft are essentially developed by the Air Force and the Navy. The reconnaissance aircraft such as the SR-71, the SR-75 that replaced it, the TR-3A Flying Batwing or Manta, the TR-3B Flying Triangle or Astra are joint funded by the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Security Agency, the CIA, and the U.S. Air Force. The U.S. Air Force has operational control of the vehicles and the pilots. The missions are coordinated amongst the agencies that provided the black funding for these programs. They're primarily reconnaissance and intelligence-oriented aircraft. Every military agency is involved in recovering crashed aircraft, whether it's foreign technology, such as foreign countries, or alien artifacts that are recovered. But primarily in 1947, when the Air Force was established, they became the primary operational control of all alien artifacts. The Defense Advanced Research Center at Papoose, which is primarily manned by the Air Force and the Navy, the National Reconnaissance Office, the CIA, and the National Security Agency, controls all research, development, logistics, and control of crashed alien artifacts. I have personally not a lot of information on actual aliens with the crashed vehicles. I was sent 2 documents by a friend of mine whose father had worked at the National Security Agency almost 30 years. He was one of the 5 people that put me in contact with his contacts while I was developing the book Alien Rapture. These 2 documents, one was the new revised charter during the Reagan administration, which says on the cover page that it's signed by proxy, which leads me to believe, and I was told, that the presidents haven't been involved since Truman. The second document we obtained was the autopsy report, attachment D, to the Eisenhower report. Now, the names and dates were left off these documents, but what leads me to believe that they are accurate is it talks about the removable lenses of the aliens before Colonel Corso had a manuscript, long before Santilli ever had the alien autopsy film. It talks about a geo-organ, which is pictured in the alien autopsy, but nobody ever brings attention to it. From the people I've talked to on the inside, the alien autopsy was made from disinformation. It was funded by the government. It is 90% accurate. But as we all know, nobody's running across 6-fingered aliens. The geo-organ, when you look at the autopsy that was showed on TV, is essentially one round, flattish organ in the center of the abdomen of the alien. If you were to design or genetically engineer a being, you probably wouldn't have a bunch of different organs that function separately on their own. You would integrate the bioorganisms into one. I talked to several judge advocate general lawyers and publishing lawyers before I allowed the manuscript to be read by anybody besides Brad Steiger. Essentially, I cannot talk about any programs I work directly on, the technology, the people assigned to it, or any other information involved with those programs. However, there's nothing against the Secrets Acts or the law to talk about secondhand information you get from people that you've known 20 or 30 years that you trust with your life. The information I talk about publicly is all secondhand information from people I've known 20 or 30 years. Essentially, when you sign certain Secrets Acts, you cannot speak about it for 30 years or more. In some cases, what you sign says you can never speak about it unless you're authorized to. I believe eventually there's always a trickle-down effect from black technology to commercial technology. The problem that most people have is that we spend billions of dollars on black technology and we keep it secret until every other country in the world discovers this technology, puts it out commercially, and then we're behind, essentially putting our own commerce secondary to other countries. We have energy technology and transportation technologies that could revolutionize and make the world better as we sit here, but it's being kept secret. Eventually, the Germans, the French, the Japanese will put out technology that they learn from us, or reverse engineer, or create on their own, that we could have a lead in. Essentially, people that have worked in the military or within the Department of Defense, most people have pensions or retirements or benefits that they wish to protect. They have families they wish to protect. A lot of people are running around saying that they work top secret programs and are talking about them in detail. I have a hard time believing that because I interviewed over 40 people that had worked within the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, had worked black development programs. I knew this personally. They would never talk to the media. They were quite nervous to even talk to me. I couldn't even use my cassette recorder to record them or take notes. They were willing to talk to me one-on-one with the promise that I would not reveal their names. But these people, some are afraid for their physical safety or their families. Others are only worried about their retirement pensions and benefits. It's different for different people. Some people that I was put in contact with trusted me, but they wouldn't talk to me at all because of what they felt was patriotism. From what I know from interviewing people and experiences that I've had, we have no functional flying saucers that meet the requirements for neither reconnaissance nor strategic missions. The problem with the flying saucers is they use a form of propulsion that we haven't perfected. When we perfected the magnetic field disruptor, which is essentially a reverse engineered UFO propulsion system, it only worked 89% as effective as it should. At 100%, it would have been able to repel gravity and you could use it as a propulsive force. But when you only have something that works 89%, that reduces mass and weight and G-forces by 89%, the only option you have to take advantage of this technology in an aerospace vehicle is to hang a triangular body on it, put 3 multi-mode engines on it, and fly this propulsion system around. I keep hearing stories of different vehicles that we use. We have something called a Sun Sieve that stays in orbit. It services National Reconnaissance Office and National Security Agency satellites. The new satellites are built to be serviced by robotic vehicles. The Sun Sieve was essentially orbited from the back of the SR-75, which replaced the SR-71. When the SR-75 gets up to 110,000 feet altitude, it launches the SCRAMP SR-74 for suborbital missions, or it can launch the Sun Sieve, which stays in permanent orbit to repair these craft. And so, reportedly, both the SR-74 SCRAMP, which is manned, and the Sun Sieve, which is a robotic vehicle, can attain orbit and potentially go to the moon. I hear stories about vehicles that have been going to the moon for 10 years, but I have not enough information to believe that it's actually going on. I believe that all forms of 75 swept-wing aircraft, delta-shaped aircraft, lifting bodies, and triangular-shaped vehicles belong to the U.S. government or some other earthly government. I believe that all these triangular and swept-wing configurations the latest ones were developed from reverse engineering technology. So it would lead me to believe that all circular or tubular vehicles belong to some sentient race not from the Earth. I was told by two friends of mine that are essentially sources, as you'd call them, that the TR-3B, the operational version, which is 600 feet across, caused the Phoenix light. The effect was caused by holographic generators that I don't have a lot of details of the technology. I'm getting pieces, and essentially they use some type of beam, focusing beam, to agitate or resonate molecules of the air, such as nitrogen and oxygen. And then at that point, same point, they're using lasers to create a three-dimensional object on this agitated field. At this point, they can only generate balls of light. Usually they're orange or red, I've heard of some blue. So if you take a craft like the TR-3B that has electrochromatic coating that can change colors, reflectiveness, and radar absorptiveness, it can cloak itself, it could look like the sky. Most of the triangles are only spotted from the bottom at night, where people have taken pictures of silhouettes, because it has this ability to change its configuration, such as color, or patterns, such as a star field or a cloud field. So if the TR-3B, which I believe it was over Phoenix and generating these holographic balls of light, all you would see would the lights and not the vehicle. I believe eventually all technology comes forward, but we have two problems now. One is the government doesn't want to admit how many billions of dollars they're putting into black programs. And two, some of the technology is so extraordinary and connected back as far back as the Roswell crash and other crashes, alien vehicles that we've reverse engineered. I'm not sure if the information will be forthright unless one crashes and CNN happens to show up and film it before it's carted off. The flying bat wing configurations, or flying wings that are such as the TR-3A and the flying triangles, are essentially tactical reconnaissance vehicles. I know nothing of the weapon systems. There are other vehicles, such as the replacement for the F-111 swing-wing bomber, that have been called several different names, that are fighters and bombers that are armed with weapons. I've essentially concentrated on the technology involved with the flying triangles. During the development of my book, I essentially started off with 5 of my closest friends who had worked in the Department of Defense and the Air Force for 20 to 30 years. Most of them I'd known since the Vietnam conflict. We decided to write the book trying to detail how the reverse engineering of technology brought forth such vehicles as the TR-3B. We made a pact that they would put me in contact with their closest friends and that I would go personally, face-to-face, talk to them, because they would not talk to me over the phone or send me information. During this process, I tried in every case to only use information in the book and my presentation that I had at least 2 sources of accurate information. I heard wild stories at times from people I really respected and trusted, but we did not develop this information if we didn't have more than one source. I applaud everybody's effort to bring out more information to the government and make the government more open with talking about crashed vehicles and advanced technology. But as far as getting on somebody's list to talk about this technology or my own personal experiences, I feel like until the list is developed and people start talking without any harm coming to them, I'll sit back and wait. I believe that the Germans and the Japanese have technology that is close to what we developed in the early 1990s, and that you will see more odd-shaped vehicles flying around. I heard in 1994 that the TR-3B prototype, which is 200 feet across, was being used by the Navy, and that the Navy was actually retrofitting a carrier to where this thing could land on a carrier and be taken below deck for repairs and to be out of observation from planes or people that pass by. To my knowledge, the largest vehicle flying is the 600 feet operational model of the TR-3B. However, the holographic generators on the TR-3A and the TR-3B can project images out to 2 miles. I think the goal for holographic generators is to essentially be able to project any type image they want. I believe the state of the technology is to where they can only project geometric objects. But you can only imagine what a vehicle would be like if you could project a giant monster in front of troops that was roaring, that looked lifelike, or if a godlike figure appeared on a cloud and told the enemy to surrender. There's any number of, just only limited by your imagination. I believe that the Foo Fighters were essentially some type of alien or sentient controlled objects. The holographic generators are developed through the normal progression of laser and holographic technology. Alien Rapture The Chosen by Edgar Fouché, myself, and Brad Steiger is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, through Galdi Press at 1-800-777-3454, or through our webpage, FouchéMedia.com, FoucheMedia.com. These are pictures of the Flying Triangle taken in 1969 in Romania, 1967 in Bulgaria. The top two were taken in Belgium in 1989 and 90. You can see the exhaust from the three multi-mode rocket engines on the top two pictures. These pictures have been greatly enhanced, or they're not very good quality.
The pictures, actual photographs are not...
Yes, actual photographs. The top picture of the Flying Triangle is the TR-3B, which has three multi-mode nuclear rocket engines on each corner, which you can see while it's in flight. This is a computer-enhanced composite picture generated by a computer based on all the specifications of known triangular vehicles. This is a schematic representation of the TR-3B from the top view, the bottom view, and the side view. Some people seeing the side view has described this as cigar-shaped or tubular-shaped. This is a picture of the B-2 bomber. It's actually a model. The picture is developed by the Air Force Recruiting Service. This is a color picture of the YB-49 Flying Wing taken in 1948. I got this from an Air Force person. A lot of people have mistaken the F-117 stealth fighter as a UFO. You can see from this direction of the aircraft at night, it does look like a UFO. Okay. This is a picture of the prototype TR-3B Flying Triangle Astra. It's 200 feet across, carries a crew of 4.
Okay. What about the Aurora?
This is the operational version of the TR-3B Flying Triangle. It's 600 feet across, uses 3 multi-mode rocket engines, one mounted on each corner underneath for propulsion. This is a picture of TR-3B Flying Triangle, which is 600 feet across. It uses a magnetic field disruptor that disrupts gravity and reduces mass and weight by 89%, and also reduces the G-forces the pilots feel. This is an F-15 pilot flying an F-15 aircraft. The canopy in this picture appears to be invisible, but it's just made out of a material that looks perfectly clear.
My name is Stephen Bassett, and I'm the founder of the Paradigm Research Group, which is an organization created to support the research effort, to support the political initiatives, and to work with researchers and activists in the field. It was started in 1996. I'm also the author of the Paradigm Clock website, which is designed to do the same. The principal direction of my work is one of forcing political initiatives at the government designed to get a specific result, and that result is fairly unambiguous, namely disclosure in a formal way by the United States government that we have an extraterrestrial presence. Beyond that, we'll see what happens. There's a complex relationship between, I think, particularly the more long-term people in the field and the politics. By and large, this has been a science-driven process. Discovery, proof, information. The politics has not really been a significant aspect of it. And so there's a misunderstanding, there's some uncertainty, and there's a certain amount of cynicism about it. There's a lot of distrust of the government within this field, appropriately so, and there's uncertainties whether any kind of government-based political action could result in a conclusive outcome. I don't blame them for that. It's appropriate, but the fact is that the very reason there's politics now is that all of this work is accumulating. It's piling up on itself. The awareness level in the United States goes up, and that includes awareness level not only of citizens, but also the awareness level of politicians, their staff, and agency personnel. And the net result is that, and this is true of in history many times, same thing with the perfect analogy is the anti-war movement. The anti-war movement starts as a rather radical fringe thing that's going against some very sacred issues that people hold, and is discounted out of hand, and then slowly builds and builds and builds until finally it is such size and such scope, and there's enough people involved that it politicizes. And it politicized enough that it brought down a president, changed a number of laws, and ultimately forced the end to the war in a way which would have been quite different. So the same thing with the UFO movement, if you want to call it that. It is now large enough. There are enough people involved that it must become political. Why? Well, you wouldn't need to be political if all that was at issue is knowing or not knowing. We have saucers, we don't have saucers. We have ETs, we don't have ETs. And that's it. We know, we don't know, and that's all that's going to happen. Politics is not important. The reason there has to be politics is that it's now quite clear that not only are there historical issues, but there are a huge range of future issues in which the reality of the extraterrestrial presence and our decisions as a republic and as a citizenry are going to become intertwined, and that we're going to make decisions in the future which this is going to affect, and those decisions could be monumental. I had the special good fortune of coming into the field 3 years ago and needing to find a niche, and lo and behold, for whatever reason, who knows why, no one had decided, gee, there isn't a person acting as a formal lobbyist for the field, for the issues. It didn't exist. And as it happened, I've lived in and out of Washington, been in and out of Washington for decades. I know the area quite well. Members of my family have lived here for 60 years. So I knew that I could operate here comfortably. So it was not a hard decision to go, okay, what I'm going to do, and this is after spending 4 months up at Pier in Cambridge, John Mack Center, that is dealing with some complex issues there. I worked there as a volunteer. I came down to Washington and opened up a home office with the intent of being a lobbying operation. And I was the first to do so for no other reason than no one else had. But the reason no one else had was that, again, the politicization of this whole phenomena has just really started to happen in a major way in the last 6 years. There's obviously no money for that work. It has to be done pro bono. And it's still highly subject to ridicule and being dismissed. So it's not an obvious choice for someone that, quote, wants to do lobbying. So I was able to make that move in '96, and overall have had a relatively good experience in that time with much more upside than downside in terms of dealing with media and political and agency people. At this point, I have formal arrangements with six groups. I am a registered lobbyist for CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, for the Enterprise Mission, for Operation Right to Know, and for Skywatch International. I consult to CAUSE. I'm not a registered lobbyist for them. And I consult to the Microsoft Network UFO Forum. All of these groups have fundamentally one thing in common, all of these entities. They pretty much are committed to the process of disclosure. They expect the government to come forward and disclose this issue. They feel it's appropriate and they want it to happen. There's differences of opinion about evidence, there's differences of opinion about strategy, but overall they have that desire. And in my opinion, they have made significant contributions to the field in one way or another. And for that reason, I work on their behalf and support them in a number of ways on a pro bono basis. And we'll do whatever they would like me to do. And whenever I'm got something going, I make sure they're involved and give them an opportunity to participate. There are many other people in the field that I admire and support. We could name names for 20 minutes. But by and large, I am going to work with and attract the individuals that are not uncomfortable about going political with this issue, about getting down where the rubber meets the road and sticking this issue right under the nose of the President, the House, Senate, appropriate government agencies, and the political press. One of the advantages of being in Washington is that you get to deal with a concentrated group of political press. There's obviously a lot of journalists. There's thousands of journalists. I'm interested in a political journalist. These are the ones that cover those issues. And when they decide to cover them, they become part of the political process. A lot of people don't realize that to the extent that politics and media and news have merged together in the last 15 years, if you were to get a list of all the people who have been in direct political positions and have gone into the media as political journalists or commentarists, or have been a speechwriter, or have been in entertainment industry and gone to news, or in all three, it is in fact a very, very long list. And so if you want to deal with consciousness raising on any subject matter, the idea that you just go to the media or you go to Congress is not sufficient. You have to go to all of these areas simultaneously. And the way things are now is that increasingly political action in Washington is driven by the political press. In other words, they seize on something, they start to elevate it, they start to ask the questions, and the politicians respond. It has long since been the other way, where the politicians do their thing and the press just follows them around and takes notes. Well, the public is going to get involved in these ways. One, increasing numbers of them are going to be accessing the internet, and they're going to be accessing websites that have information about the science and the politics of the UFO question. That's a given. They're also getting involved by talk radio. Millions and millions of citizens are listening to talk radio and starting to formulate opinions about this. Out of that, beyond that, there are a number of initiatives that they can directly get involved with. The most important one, in my opinion, is the congressional petition drive. There is an open congressional hearing petition calling for Congress to permit government employees, former and current, to go before the Congress in an open hearing to discuss their personal experiences with both evidence and events directly implicating the extraterrestrial issue. There is a paper petition on the Paradigm Research Group website, Paradigm Clock. The paper petition can be downloaded from a number of other sites, including Stargate International and Anagram Video and several others. There's also an electronic petition at the Paradigm Research Group site that allows people to simply submit their name directly. The American people can make their opinion very succinctly known by filling out those petitions to the point where we have somewhere in the range of 500,000 to 1 million. When we have that kind of number, we're going to create a very, very formal press event, and we're going to present those signatures with all the bells and whistles to representatives of the House and Senate leadership. So that's a completely inexpensive, trivial way for citizens to directly impact the issue. There is going to be an effort to put specific language regarding the congressional hearings on the state ballots as propositions or ballot initiatives in the 2000 election. This process is underway. MUFON, the largest and best-known UFO organizations in the country, has been approached formally to back it with their membership. I hope that MUFON makes the decision to do that. That ballot initiative will be in some key states, including Arizona and California. People can get involved there. They can also get involved by emailing and faxing their representatives at the Senate and Congress, and the key news people that they work with or know about in their state, as well as national news, regarding the lack of in-depth coverage on the UFO question, particularly the government posture on it and the cover-up. That is an easy thing to do, and those faxes and emails do count. As a matter of fact, before the scandal on President Clinton broke, we knew that a number of members of congressional committees had gotten so many faxes and emails during that end of 97 period that they were actually discussing the issue of hearings in caucus rooms and in the hallways on the Capitol. That was all shut down with the beginning of the scandal. That impeachment process is now over, and we expect them to go back to work, and we expect to see these faxes turning up again in emails. So, the problem here is that the United States is in such a preeminent position, both politically and militarily, in the world now. And every country out there, except for a few, have such significant political and economic ties to us that there is enormous disincentive for a nation to, quote, out that issue. In other words, what is the upside for a Belgium or a Brazil to suddenly decide that it is going to press the political initiative and try to, quote, create its own formal disclosure process through its own government? The upside is probably a lot of ridicule and bizarre press. The downside is suddenly economic relationships take a turn and go south. I believe the rest of the world sees this as the United States' a decision to make. It's our call. And what will happen is that once the United States government discloses on this, quite a few other governments around the world are going to quickly step forward and say something along the lines of, well, you know, we actually had a pretty strong sense of this too. We have our own inside information on this, and we second that disclosure. We confirm that disclosure, and we certainly look forward to working with the United States to address the issue both theoretically, philosophically, and politically. There is, I believe within the United States government there is a conflict, there is a debate amongst certain elements and groups that they're attuned to this about whether to disclose or not. There's some indications that they were ramping the process up at the end of the Bush administration for disclosure in the first year of the Bush administration. And I could spend a lot of time saying why that is. But from their point of view, it would have been a highly favorable arena to do it. The election of Clinton completely threw any such plans up in the air. But overall, there is in fact a debate, so that they're weighing it one against the other. And it's a standoff at this point, in my opinion. In other words, it's a standoff. The two ideas, formally disclose, continue to sit tight, are in standoff. Neither group has the upper hand. And we need the American people to break the tie. That it is the opinion of myself and the people that I work with and support that it is in the interest of the nation and the people to disclose. If we didn't think that, then obviously pursuing this would be a little bit disingenuous as well as not in the national interest. The reasons why that is are very complex and we need a much longer interview to get into. But the upshot is simply that now more damage is being done by this intense secrecy in general, and certainly the secrecy regarding this specific issue, than good is being created. And as a result, just as you have with a very a boil, if it gets large enough and painful enough, at some point the decision has to be made to lance it. This is a boil that needs to be lanced. There is a whole lot of neat things that will happen worldwide and certainly in America when we do, and I believe that the good will outweigh the bad. If I am wrong, I will be happy to publicly apologize, as I'm sure all my associates would, and we'll say, gee, sorry, we didn't think it was going to be this way. But that's the nature of governance. That's the nature of being a free nation, not having everything delivered to you on a silver platter and not only making decisions when you absolutely know the outcome. You have to take chances and act in a manner you consider in the best interest of the public. Obviously, there are people who disagree. We think that eventually they would be persuaded. By the way, I left out one organization when I was listing the groups that I represent, and that's Stargate International, which in fact was the source of the congressional hearing petition, and then it was written at their headquarters just before the July gathering in Roswell in 1997. And they are still the quote parent of that petition, though, which has become part of the larger community and represents the larger community. And the petitions are still gathered in an address related to Stargate International in Tucson, and that's going to remain the case. The other electronic petitions are gathered by me in Washington. Stargate International is sort of in suspended operations now. but and where that organization is going is unknown at this point. Nevertheless, it remains the parent of the petition and will continue to be associated with that petition as it moves forward. And I'm looking forward to having the members of Stargate International, past and present, be on the steps of the Senate when those petitions are presented. I'm sometimes asked, why not take a more Deus ex machina approach to this, namely simply go about our lives and permit the extraterrestrials to make the call. Obviously, if they want formal disclosure, they could have it any time if they desired. This is an issue that I've thought about, but there's a fairly straightforward response to it. One, I'm not comfortable with making decisions about my life, about the nation's life, and about our global environment based upon the actions of others outside of our reality. We can't control what they do, and therefore I think we need to operate in our best interest, and they will do what they will. The second point that needs to be made is that a very reasonable interpretation of the events that have transpired since 1947 is a ramping process in which a number of things are going on simultaneously, not the least of which is that the awareness level of the people of this planet is being significantly altered and raised on this question. And in the last 6 years, clearly there's been a sea change in the types of sightings, the frequency of sightings, the quality of sightings. It's not inconceivable, and I think this is a reasonable position to take, that these entities are forcing the action indirectly, and the question would be why. And it's really not a complicated question. There is a world of difference between a species of sentient animals, such as ourselves, having this particular paradigm crammed down their throat by some Independence Day reality or formal injection by extraterrestrials, as opposed to our global societies educating ourselves to the issue, politically engaging it, and then openly acknowledging it to ourselves, formally disclosing it to ourselves, and then dealing with the issue as we see fit. One is completely disempowering, and one is very empowering. It is not unreasonable to think that these entities do not fundamentally want to overly disrupt any more than they already are and disempower our cultures, particularly at a time when we're obviously quite unstable. It could cause a lot of havoc and damage. And so, frankly, I see them forcing it indirectly, waiting for us to do our job. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I have no trouble making this statement, that once we do disclose, contact is going to follow rather remarkably soon. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. The religious issue is raised quite often, and it's funny. I will say this. I have not really encountered much of a problem there at all. I have talked with people from time to time who have very strong religious views. I happen to know that within the field itself, we have plenty of very religious people that are working in research, working in media in the UFO question. There have been an occasional blip on the screen. I think not too long ago, Pat Robertson made a comment that there was some sort of sedanting relationship between the issue. But overall, the religious institutions and followers of religion in this country have really not had much to say about it, nor have they shown significant discomfort about it. The primary discomfort comes from the media and the politicians, way above the levels that you see from religion. And I have a very gut feeling that religion is going to be remarkably adaptive to this, that they're going to take it in stride and be less, perhaps, upset by it than your average run-of-the-mill atheist. Other culture, as you move out of the country and you get into the complex world situations, certainly. The fact is that everything that humans have ever done, every major move that we've ever made, every significant change in worldviews has always disrupted cultures. There's nothing new here. The fact is that generally the damage is done not because change comes, but because it's not addressed. It's coveted, meaning it's kept tight amongst a very cliquish power group that then wield all kinds of havoc and damage. or it's twisted, it's subverted, it's disinformation. That's where the damage comes. Generally, the human race has done quite well when it confronts new and unusual changes in its history and moves forward. So in fact, in my opinion, the non-disclosure process, whatever benefits it provided, particularly during the Cold War, overall is run its course. And that further attempts to suppress this issue is going to start doing the same kind of damage that has occurred over the last 5,000 years whenever global cultures and global religions and nations and empires have confronted extreme change. Get on top of it. Make it your own. Engage it. Politicize it, and you will master it, and everything will be just fine. And any 17-year-old kid can tell you this. People want to know what 17-year-olds think about this. Go talk to John Greenwald, the publisher of the Black Vault on the Internet. This guy is wiser and more astute than 90% of the entire political management in Washington, D.C. And one of the reasons he's that way is because he's young, and he hasn't been influenced by both the historical and educational realities that we grew up with. Times are changing, and the issue really is whether our generation and the generation behind me, which really goes back to World War II, is going to get involved in this, or we're going to be stuck in the muds and let this thing really dawdle unnecessarily. For those individuals who are interested in the political aspects of this and the more activist aspects, obviously they can go to the websites of all the groups that I work with. Rather than give those out, I'll simply say if you go to the Paradigm Clock website, which is www.paradigmclock.com, and that's P-A-R-D-I-G-M, not D-I-M-E, you'll find links to all of the organizations that I'm working with, as well as a full section on the politics of UFOs, including the initiatives for the ballot wording, for the congressional hearing, direct petitioning, lobbying, all of these things well covered there. Also, the Paradigm Clock has two other things which I'm quite proud of, one of which is it has the largest online bibliography, reference bibliography for the field in the world. 2,500 authored references there, both alphabetically by author and by category, breaking them up in the various aspects of the field that they focus on. The largest bibliography in the world is about 6,000 references amassed by Jerome Clark and recently published in his UFO Encyclopedia. That's a pretty sizable reference bibliography, by the way, for those people who think this is all thin and illusory. And the other thing, maybe more important, is the Paradigm Clock website has a paradigm clock. And this is a very intentional device. It is a metaphor, exactly analogous to the Doomsday Clock, which was published initially in 1947 by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. That clock tracked how close we were, midnight, to nuclear war. Midnight, the game is up. And they were able to use that metaphor to educate the public and the media about the fact that there is a relationship between building hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs and missiles and planes and having confrontational politics and a result, namely nuclear war, everybody dies, game over. Midnight was the metaphor. And the Paradigm Clock, midnight represents something else, something a little less sinister. Midnight on the Paradigm Clock means that the formal acknowledgement by our government of the extraterrestrial presence has occurred, or that the top papers in the nation, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, have acknowledged that presence in consensus editorials in those papers, which would have roughly the same result. When that happens, we strike midnight. That's what the Paradigm Clock tracks. It was published initially on April 30th of 1998, and it was set at 3 minutes to midnight. However, in order to parallel it with the Doomsday Clock, it was retroactively published in the same year, 1947, as the Doomsday Clock, and set at the same time, I believe 7 minutes to midnight. And then it was changed over these intervening years retroactively, and that is all chronicled on the website. You can see some of the things that occurred and how they moved the clock forward and how they moved it back. And then it was formally published on April 30th at 3 minutes to midnight. It's been changed once since then. It is now 3 minutes and 30 seconds to midnight because of some events that took place last year, not the least of which the death of Philip Corso, before he was really fully engaged by the mainstream media and before he could appear in congressional hearings. There were some other things that set us back a little bit. So the Paradigm Clock is there. As far as contacting the Paradigm Research Group, all the contact information is on that website, but for those without computers, they can reach PRG at paradigmrg@aol.com, or they can call 301-564-1820. The website for the Paradigm Clock, the official website of the Paradigm Research Group, is www.paradigmclock.com. And the email address is paradigmrg@aol.com.
Well, about 2 months after TWA Flight 800 went down, I was contacted by Christina Borgeson, a producer, two-time Emmy Award-winning producer for CBS Reports in Manhattan, New York. And she asked if I would use Remote Viewing Technologies, the company, to employ police officers to augment their investigative efforts in search of the answers to what brought Flight 800 down. And so we had been training in remote viewing technologies we've been training police officers for about 2 years at that juncture. We had about 300 and some odd police officers trained. So we employed 60 police officers who were working pro bono across the country, and we scattered them purposely because we didn't want anybody to be able to identify specifically where they were or get to all 60 of them. And we used their remote viewing skills after we calibrated them. We used them against TWA Flight 800, going backwards in time to perceive an event. And that's all they knew. And we were trying to see what kinds of pieces of evidence they could pull out of the flight, what happened to the flight, where was the flight struck, what were the images, what were the perceptions of the events that took place that night. And the remote viewers all perceived elements of a missile and ships and water and aircraft and helicopters and other things. But probably the most critical thing that they pulled from all of this was about 80% of them saw something that they described as a rod of light, or others called it a beam of light that came from the ground, not the water. And in all of the profiles that they sketched of the aircraft, all of the impact points for this beam of light or rod of light were on the left-hand side of the aircraft, which did not support the missile theory. The missile theory was that the missile came from the water or from out in the water, from either a submarine or from a ship or something else, and that all of the points of impact would have been on the right-hand side. And so it caused us to look very carefully at where and what might have happened, where would this rod of light come from, or this beam of light. And then we started looking at the lay of the land and identified Brookhaven National Labs and a top-secret naval weapons test facility that shared a fence line with the National Laboratory. We started asking individuals that worked at the labs what was going on there, what was being tested, and gradually we came to individual sources that indicated to us that the weapon that was being tested the night that Flight 800 was struck was a high-powered microwave weapon, a directed energy weapon being built in support of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And it was a weapon that produced 1.4 gigawatts of power, that's a billion watts of power, in a concentrated stream of electrons guided by a self-generated electromagnetic field. And that weapon has an electromagnetic pulse effect. That's what it kills with. And it's designed to kill systems. And that night, a drone Tomahawk missile was fired from the decks of the USS Normandy that was climbing up to altitude to be fired at by this high-powered microwave weapon when TWA Flight 800 came in a flight corridor that was established by the FAA because this test was going on. This corridor was codenamed Betty. And TWA Flight 800 came into what is called the gun target line. They came in between Brookhaven National Labs, where the weapons system was located, and the drone Tomahawk missile, which was going to be fired on by the HPM weapon. After all of this was brought to bear, there was a large report that was prepared. It was presented to CBS. The CBS executives refused to do the report. The producer was subsequently fired. The offices were raided by the FBI, and all of the investigative data that we pulled in after about 4 months of work and 4 months of remote viewing work that just continued to augment the investigative effort from this small team for CBS Reports. So the whole project was scrapped by CBS. The CBS is owned by GE. GE has a subsidiary, which is Phillips Labs, which has now been sold off to as a foreign corporation. But Phillips was the weapons designer. The Phillips Labs built the high-powered microwave weapon that was being built in support of the SDI initiative. And the reason the whole thing was covered up was because on May 17, 1993, Les Aspin, the Secretary of Defense for the Clinton administration, the brand new Clinton administration, declared to the American people that we were at the, quote, end of the Star Wars era, end quote, meaning that we were now no longer going to continue to build weapons that would be put on platforms and placed in orbit around our planet to kill satellites or to kill intercontinental ballistic missiles at the boost phase or post-boost phase.
In your book, you talk about knowing about a crash retrieval. When was the first time that you were aware of a crash, either Roswell or any other crashes here in the United States?
Well, the first I knew about was about around the beginning of '47 when I came back from World War II. And I had, in intelligence sources, there was reports that said that UFOs had crashed in different parts of the world, and they were buzzing our planes and so forth. I knew about it then, but I didn't know about the Roswell crash then. I learned about the Roswell crash when I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was the duty officer that night. That meant I was in charge of the security of the whole area, including the inspection of the guards, every place where they were. So I went around about 2 or 3 in the morning to the veterinarian area, because we had horses at Fort Riley. And one of the sergeants that I knew was a sergeant of the guard. I used to bowl with him. And I told him, Sergeant, how's everything going? They told me at headquarters that this area was very secure. He said, yes, come on, Colonel. He said, I want to show you something. So he took me back in the back room, and there was 5 crates. They looked like crates there. Lifted up a tarpaulin on one, I did, and here's this body there. At first I thought it was maybe a child, because it was only about 5 feet, shorter than 5 feet. It looked to me, and it was floating in fluid. And then I took a good look at it, and this lasted about 10 or 15 seconds only. And I figured, what is that? And the stomach sort of turned. But that was usual, because in combat, when you see people killed, your stomach sort of turned. But you have to recover fast, especially if you're an officer in command, you have to keep going. I did the same thing that night at Fort Riley. And I covered it up, and I told him, Sergeant, be careful, this is very careful, I don't want you to get in trouble, get out of here. And I'm not going to put it in my report at all.
Okay, what did this, can you describe what this, this body that you saw?
Yes, I'll describe it. It looked like it had spindly, legs were not big legs, they were sort of spindly. The arms were sort of, I saw 4 fingers, I saw no thumb. And the chest was small, sort of, and the skin looked sort of grayish color. And then the head was large for the proportion of the body. Not real big now, but large. And the eyes were both slanted, sort of. And they had about a half a filament on them. And no nose, no ears, no mouth, just slits. So I covered it up, and I figured to myself when I was walking away and outside, I better not say anything about this. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. So I figured operate in the intelligence manner. Hold this in reserve, put it up here someplace or back here. Maybe in the future I'll get some cooperation and be able to evaluate this, but not at the moment. I don't know what it is. So I promptly put it back in my head, forgot about it.
Okay.
Then 10 years later, I was at Fort Riley, I was at White Sands, commanding the missile range. Well, at the White House, I kept getting reports, but none of them tied in definitely to this experience. So at White Sands, my own radars were picking things up, items going in the air, 3,000 or 4,000 miles an hour. And I had radars, pencil beam, which would lock on the targets. They were good radars for the day. And I was the only, my battalion, the only one had radars that could read altitude. The Air Force couldn't even in those days. These were modern Nike radars. And in the later stages, to show you how important it was, I started getting atomic warheads. So I figured there's something up there traveling with this speed. What are they? So, like a good soldier, I reported to higher headquarters. Answer back was, forget it, we're not interested. Don't report anymore. Well, that's, if they want it that way, good. Then when I get reports in the future, I tell the boy, deliver the tapes to me. Because we had tapes that would record the whole firing sequence. And I checked the tapes and I figured, well, this is accurate. What the boy said is true. There's something up there flying around that's beyond our technical capability. We have nothing that can go 3,000 or 4,000 miles an hour and break the lock that quick on a radar. Especially these radars which locked on targets.
But how did you know, how do you go back to seeing what you saw and relating it to Roswell?
Well, let me tell you a little later now. Let me continue on this. So a few years later, I had some experience in this, that there were something like they called extraterrestrials. So I was thinking maybe this was one of them. Then when General Trudeau reported to him in the Pentagon, and he told me before he was going to send for me as soon as I got back, because I commanded the range in the missile in New Mexico, and I was Inspector General of 7th Army, my second tour there. So I reported to him, saluted him, he said, you aboard, Phil? I told him, yes, sir. He said, good, watch things for me, the rest I don't understand. And that's the only orders he ever gave me, because after all, I'd been to the White House staff, he sent me there. So he called me in one day, he said, I'm going to make you chief of the Point and Mountain Division, and you're going to inherit a 3-drawer file. I want you to go through that file and look what's there, and you give me a program and tell me what you think they are. So I take this file in my office, downstairs from his office, on the second floor in the Pentagon, and I open it up and I start finding this material, which he called later, of course, it was junk file. And it was a bunch of wires, which I didn't even know what they were, which were emitting colors. I didn't even know if they were wires. I had this chip, this integrated circuit, a laser instrument. They could do like some of the fine cuttings that they said in animal mutilations. And I had also fiber optics. I had those. And no, we called them, we started that because one of my, and I had the reports on autopsy that performed at Walter Reed on our lab, which we financed at Walter Reed. And when I read that, it matched with what I saw at Fort Riley 14 years before. The whole autopsy was similar to what I had seen. So then I started putting 2 and 2 together. And gradually these items will start putting, then the general called me in and said, work out a program. Find scientists and engineers that are working on these things and shove them in there. I told him, but General, I have to study these things a little bit because really, I told him, I'm not that bright. I don't know what a lot of these things are, but they're important. He said, well, Phil, they are important. Give me a program what they are. So asking questions, talking to industry, talking to scientists, I finally came up with a program for the general which he was satisfied with. He said, okay, start it working. You're in charge. And keep me informed. So I started getting these things, and I had some idea. I wasn't sure what the chip was. Integrated circuit in those days, a little beyond me. So I started talking to people, and I figured, well, this must be important. So that went the write-up, and they went to Bell Lab. Then I had an instrument also, which I didn't discuss in the book. And like a human, I figured, well, it won't come on, it'll look like a little flashlight. The battery must be dead. Of course, there was no battery in it. That was thinking in this world's terms. So one day I went down to our lab at Belvoir, and I told the boys there, I know them very well, we went in the lab and they were doing some work on radiation. That damn thing came on. It was an instrument, and you run over the body, it would blink, and it had 2 dials on it, which lit up. But that was another instrument. But beyond that, getting back to the body, so when I read the autopsy, I went to the general. I told him, General, I've seen one of these. And I started describing it to him. He said, put it all on paper, Phil, and give it to me. So we put it down. I put it on paper. And he said, my God, Phil, he said, what do we got? What are we up against here? I told him, I don't know. He was a very religious guy. He used to go to retreats at Loyola. And also, he was the kind of man that took his helmet off and got a sergeant's helmet at Fort Charles Hill and out and fought with his men. So when I started putting all this on the extraterrestrial together, we finally gave it a name. I told him, it looks like, these are clones. And so the name came out, extraterrestrial biological entity, because that's what we figured they were. We better describe it. We never used the letters E.